It should have been the happiest morning of their lives. The sky over Westbridge City was clear and golden, the kind of sunlight that made even concrete shine. Planes took off like birds in flight, and the halls of Westbridge International Airport buzzed with rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and the low hum of dreams in motion. Amid the crowd, two siblings stood out, not just for how they looked, but for the energy they carried. Alyssa and Jalen Carter were identical twins, 26 years old, with matching smiles and a quiet confidence that turned heads. They were close, not just by blood, but by bond. They had grown up side by side, sharing books, music, birthdays, and secrets. Even now in their adult lives, they remained each other's anchor. But there was one thing they didn't share: a tolerance for injustice. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day. They were finally flying to Paris, a trip they had dreamed about since their teenage years. And not just to wander the streets or take photos at the Eiffel Tower. This was Fashion Week, and Jalen had been personally invited to attend. His designs, once stitched by hand in their small apartment, had now caught the attention of rising stars. Alyssa, a gifted software developer, had saved every spare dollar to help him launch. Now, it was her turn to celebrate too. They had worked for years, late nights, long hours, constant sacrifice. This trip was their reward, so they didn't hold back. They booked first-class tickets on Novasky, a high-end airline known for luxury. Service, champagne before takeoff, and reclining seats like hotel beds. It was a splurge, yes, but one they had earned. They arrived at the airport early. Alyssa wore tailored gray trousers and a white silk blouse, her natural curls pinned neatly to one side. Jalen had on a navy blazer with embroidered cuffs and sleek black pants, one of his own creations. Their luggage matched, sleek, silver, and polished. Their smiles matched too. Everything felt right, until it didn't. The woman behind the counter didn't smile. She looked up at them once, briefly, then down at the documents they handed her: passports, IDs, and printed boarding passes. She didn't say hello. She didn't welcome them. She just squinted at the papers, lips pressed into a tight line. For a few long seconds, she stared, flipping the documents over as if something was wrong. Then came the sentence: "These tickets aren't yours." Alyssa blinked. She thought she had misheard. "I'm sorry. These belong to someone else. Please step aside." Jalen stepped forward calmly. "There must be a mistake. The names match. Look right here. Jalen Carter and Alyssa Carter. That's us." He pointed at the booking confirmation, clear as day. But the woman didn't check. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer to help. Instead, she turned away and waved the next customer forward, ignoring them completely. For a moment, the twins just stood there. Surely this was a misunderstanding, a system glitch, a mix-up. They weren't causing a scene. They were being polite, patient. They stepped to the side and waited, hoping the agent would come back to clear things up. She didn't. They asked for a supervisor. A man in a navy vest came over, tall, stern-faced. He listened without nodding, arms folded tightly across his chest. Alyssa explained everything again, clearly, calmly. He said nothing. Then, in the same cold tone, he repeated, "These tickets aren't yours. Please leave the line." Jalen's jaw tightened. "But we paid for them ourselves. We booked months ago." "You're telling us we faked all this?" The man shrugged. "If you can't prove it right now, you'll have to move." He didn't even wait for a reply before turning his back. People in the terminal were starting to notice. Some passengers glanced over. A few whispered. Others scoffed. "Why are they holding up the line?" "Probably fake tickets." "Trying to get a free upgrade, maybe." Step asked questions. The security guards 5 minutes later. One of them crossed his arms and pointed to side doors. "Let's move it, folks. You're disrupting." Disrupting? Alyssa felt heat in her chest. Done everything right, paid full price, arrived early, bought all documentation, and now were being treated like losers, like criminal, like they didn't belong. Walked away from the desk, escorted by guards. Jalen clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Alyssa's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. They didn't say it aloud, but they both knew what this was really about. They sat on a metal bench near an empty gate, away from the noise and movement. The terminal that once felt exciting now felt cold. Jalen leaned forward, elbows on knees, face buried in his hands. Alyssa stared at the floor, her heart pounding in her chest like it might break free. This trip was supposed to be their celebration, a reward for years of effort, grit, and quiet endurance. But now it felt like a punishment. They hadn't done anything wrong. Yet somehow they had become a problem, and no one cared. After a long stretch of silence, Jalen pulled out his phone. He opened the Twitter app. His thumb hovered for a second. Then, with steady hands, he typed, "Denied boarding on Alp Nova Sky despite first-class tickets, matching IDs, and confirmed booking. No help, no explanation, just removed. We know why. Thars travel while black." He attached photos, their printed boarding, passes, their IDs, and a blurry picture of the check-in desk from a distance. He hit tweet, then sat back. Within minutes, the post took off. Retweets, likes, comments, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. This is disgusting. Tag the CEO. Lawyer up. This happens way too often. Enough is enough. Nova Sky, do better. Activists picked it up. Journalists messaged asking for interviews. Public figures began to repost and comment. Suddenly, the quiet corner they were sitting in became the center of a national conversation. People were angry, and not just for Alyssa and Jalen, for themselves, for their own stories, for the pattern that repeated again and again. As Jalen scrolled through the outpouring of support, a strange feeling settled in his chest. It felt good. It felt powerful. But it also felt frustrating. Because the pain. They felt the humiliation, the heat of judgment, the coldness of being dismissed was still inside them. None of the tweets, no matter how kind, could take away the memory of that moment. The moment their joy turned into shame. The moment they were told, without words, "You don't belong here." Alyssa looked at her brother and whispered, "They believe us." Jalen nodded. "Yeah, but they're not the ones who need convincing." The support pouring in online was overwhelming. Thousands of people had shared Alyssa and Jalen's post. Many were outraged, some were crying, and others were reliving their own painful airport memories. It felt like the whole world was listening. But sympathy wasn't enough. They didn't just want pity from strangers behind screens. They needed something real. They needed justice. And that's when Jalen remembered something important, something he had almost forgotten in the haze of embarrassment and anger. He turned to Alyssa and asked quietly, "Do you think Dad would get involved?" Alyssa raised an eyebrow. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Their father, Richard Carter, was not just any dad. He was a business legend. Years ago, he had built his airline, Falcon Air, from the ground up, starting with one leased aircraft and a loan from a cousin. Now it was a global name. He was known for being sharp, determined, and fearless in business. But at home, he was just Dad. He rarely stepped into their personal lives. He raised them to be independent, to solve problems, to never use his name for shortcuts. Calling him now felt like surrender. "I don't know," Alyssa said softly, looking down at her phone. "Wouldn't it be like asking him to fix things we couldn't handle ourselves?" "Maybe," Jalen replied. "But this isn't just about us anymore. It's bigger. We've got to make a point." Alyssa nodded slowly. With a deep breath, Jalen unlocked his phone and found his father's number in his favorites. His thumb hovered for a moment. Then he tapped, "Call." His heart raced. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over yet. The call rang twice before a warm, familiar voice answered. "Hey, buddy. What's going on?" Richard Carter's voice carried the calm strength of a man who had faced storms and won. There was always a mix of power and kindness in how he spoke, something that made his kids feel safe. But today, Jalen hesitated. He didn't know how to explain what had just happened, not without sounding like he was complaining, not without sounding like he was weak. Alyssa gently nudged him. "Tell him." Jalen cleared his throat and spoke, his voice shaking. "Dad, something happened at the airport. Something bad." That was all it took. Richard's tone changed instantly, from lighthearted to sharp and focused. "What do you mean bad? Are you two all right?" Alyssa jumped in, words tumbling from her lips before she could control them. "We're okay. But Nova Sky Airlines kicked us out. They wouldn't let us check in, even though we had real tickets and everything matched. They treated us like we didn't belong." There was a long silence, a silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, Richard's voice returned. It was calm, but cold like steel dipped in ice. "Start from the beginning," he said. For the next 10 minutes, the twins spoke, taking turns, filling in every painful detail. The check-in agent who looked at them like they were lying. The supervisor who didn't care. The security guards who didn't ask questions, just ordered them out. The stares, the whispers, the looks of judgment from strangers who didn't know anything but assumed the worst. The humiliation of being removed from the line, even though they had done nothing wrong. And the worst part? Knowing, deep down, that the color of their skin was part of the reason. As they spoke, Richard didn't interrupt. But on his end, his grip on the phone tightened. His jaw clenched. By the time they finished, his knuckles were pale. This wasn't just some business mistake. This was personal. Because once, long ago, Richard had been in their shoes, denied a seat, ignored in meetings, underestimated at every turn. He had promised himself that if he ever had power, he'd never let that happen to his children. "Okay," Richard said finally, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "First, take a deep breath. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me?" Nothing. Those words were a bomb. They didn't fix everything, but they gave Alyssa and Jalen something they hadn't felt in hours. Validation. Still, the pain clung to them like smoke. "We know we didn't do anything," Jalen replied, his voice quiet. "But what now? Nobody's really going to listen to us, right?" Richard let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Oh, they'll listen." Richard Carter moved fast. Years of business had trained him to respond to crisis with calm strategy. "First," he said, "document everything, every screenshot, every name, every detail. Get a copy of your confirmation emails. Save the social media posts." The twins began collecting everything. Their ticket receipts, boarding passes, even a short video Jalen had taken from their bench after the incident. Then Richard called his top attorney, even though it was past midnight. "I need a case. File on Nova Sky Airlines," he said flatly. "Find out every policy they broke today. Draft a complaint. We're coming after them hard." Next, Richard called his PR director. "I want the world to know what happened to my kids, but not just as another viral story. I want people to see the pattern. Show them this is part of something bigger." The PR team got to work immediately. By sunrise, carefully written stories began to appear on news websites and blog pages, not angry rants, but thoughtful, detailed reports about racial profiling in the airline industry. Using the Carter twins' experience as a lens into the larger problem, the internet exploded. More passengers shared similar stories of mistreatment, neglect, and subtle acts of racism they had faced at airports. Hashtags like "Yara Justice for the Carters" and "Yara Accountability in Airlines" started trending across platforms. Nova Sky was now in the spotlight, and not the good kind. They thought they could brush it off. As the Carter twins' story gained traction across social media and news outlets, the airline's leadership panicked. In a rushed attempt to control the damage, they posted a vague, carefully worded apology on Twitter. "We regret any inconvenience caused and are currently investigating the matter." That was it. No names, no details, no ownership. To Richard Carter, that response was a slap in the face. His children, humiliated, disrespected, and pushed out of line like they were intruders, deserved far more than a recycled PR script, and certainly more than a hollow corporate tweet. He wasn't just a father defending his family now. He was a businessman engaging a war. With his legal team and media strategists already in motion, Richard picked up the phone again. This time, for his boldest move yet, he called the CEO of Nova Sky Airlines directly. This wasn't a friendly check-in. It was a power play. When the CEO answered, Richard introduced himself with calm clarity, but his words carried heavy weight. He didn't need to boast. His name alone spoke volumes in the aviation world. "I'm Richard Carter. My children were targeted by your staff, denied boarding, and humiliated in public. We both know this isn't a simple misunderstanding. If this isn't resolved immediately, fully and publicly, you will feel exactly how wide my reach is." There was no yelling, no threats shouted, just quiet, unmistakable authority. "Falcon Air and our global partners can and will make life very difficult for Nova Sky. And trust me, negative press is just the beginning." The line went silent for a few seconds. Then the CEO began to stammer. He apologized, promised to investigate, assured compensation for the twins, but Richard wasn't buying it. "You have 24 hours, he said firmly, "not to say sorry, but to make this right, publicly, transparently, or I take this everywhere." And then he hung up. Back at Nova Sky's corporate offices, panic set in like wildfire. The CEO immediately called an emergency meeting. Executives poured into the boardroom, clutching reports, watching their screens light up with press inquiries and social media mentions. Everyone looked tense. The Carter family name was trending. The twin siblings' story was now everywhere, not just on Twitter, but across national news outlets and global media feeds. Richard's PR team had pushed the story with precision. They knew how to work the system because Richard had built an empire doing just that. What was supposed to be a minor incident was spiraling into a global brand disaster. To make matters worse, passengers who had witnessed the scene at Westbridge Airport began to speak up online. "I saw it happen. They were calm, respectful. The staff treated them like they didn't matter." This was racial profiling, plain and simple. More flames, more fuel, and Nova Sky's PR department couldn't put out the fire fast enough. This wasn't just about Alyssa and Jalen anymore. Their story became a rallying cry for anyone who had been pushed aside, judged, or quietly denied respect in places they rightfully belonged. People began flooding Nova Sky's posts with personal testimonies of mistreatment, some recent, some dating back years. The airline's attempt to downplay the incident had backfired badly. Their generic apology, "We regret any inconvenience," only added to the backlash. Critics, influencers, and columnists tore it apart. This isn't a lost bag. This is a systemic issue. Meanwhile, Alyssa and Jalen sat quietly in the terminal, watching their phones light up every few seconds. Messages poured in, articles, retweets, DMs from reporters and celebrities, strangers approaching them with words of support. One man came up and said softly, "I saw what happened. I didn't speak up. I should have. I'm sorry." Another woman handed them a coffee and whispered, "Thank you for standing up." Some people even refused to board their flights out of solidarity, saying they wouldn't fly with Nova Sky again after witnessing such discrimination. Alyssa felt overwhelmed, not just by the kindness, but by the weight of it all. "We didn't mean for this to become a movement," she said. Jalen nodded. "We just wanted to go on vacation." And that was the truth. They weren't trying to make headlines. They weren't trying to pick a fight. They just wanted to be treated like everyone else. Back in his office, Richard Carter was already planning his next step. He knew Nova Sky wouldn't bend under moral pressure alone. But money, that was a language they understood. So he called Falcon Air's operations chief. "Delay all outbound flights for 24 hours, especially at airports where Nova Sky shares terminals. Notify our partner airlines and code share networks. Let's create some ripple." It was a strategic move, not sabotage, but it had consequences. In aviation, delays at one airline can cause chaos for many others. Terminals get jammed, gates back up, schedules collapse. Nova Sky was deeply tied into Falcon Air's global network. By pausing key Falcon Air flights, Richard triggered a bottleneck that directly affected Nova Sky's own operations. And it worked fast. Within hours, their internal systems began flashing with alerts. Delayed cargo routes. Grounded aircraft stuck behind Falcon Air traffic. Angry passengers filing complaints. News of airport slowdowns reaching journalists. Behind the scenes, Nova Sky was bleeding money. And they knew exactly who was holding the blade. At first glance, Richard Carter's move didn't seem connected to Nova Sky Airlines at all. After all, he didn't touch their planes. He didn't post any more tweets or name them directly in the press. What he did was instruct Falcon Air, the global airline he had built with sweat and grit, to delay all its international departures, specifically those from terminals shared with Nova Sky. And that decision hit like a thunderclap. You see, the aviation world is deeply intertwined. Flights don't just move alone. They share airspace, terminals, ground crews, luggage belts, and runway schedules. When Falcon Air slowed down, it created a chain reaction. And because Nova Sky's operations were closely linked to Falcon Air in many hubs, their system began to jam instantly. The impact rolled out like a storm. From New York to Frankfurt, Dubai to Johannesburg, departure boards started flashing red, delayed, canceled, delayed. At one terminal in London, a passenger groaned, "Not again?" while a family in Brazil sat on their suitcases for 5 hours, unsure if they'd make their connection. People missed weddings. Business deals fell through. Elderly passengers were left confused in waiting areas. And all the while, Nova Sky's customer service lines rang nonstop. On social media, angry posts flooded in. "What's happening at the airports? Why is everything delayed? Nova Sky, fix this." Then someone connected the dots. One viral tweet read, "Funny how this chaos started right after the Carter twins were kicked off their flight. Looks like Falcon Air's CEO isn't playing games." Hashtags took over. Boycott Nova Sky, Chapter Justice, in the sky. Carter twins, deserve better people were no longer just watching. They were choosing sides. Inside Nova Sky's headquarters, the atmosphere turned frantic. The CEO sat at the head of a long table, pale-faced and tight-lipped. His top executives were hunched over tablets and laptops, trying to track the avalanche of delays and cancellations in real time. Phone calls from major investors, airline partners, and airport authorities poured in, each one angrier than the last. "This is unacceptable. We need answers. We'll pull out if this continues." The CEO rubbed his temples and muttered, "We underestimated him." He didn't need to say who. Everyone at that table knew Richard Carter wasn't bluffing. If they didn't act fast, their entire operation, billions of dollars, years of reputation, could collapse under the weight of his quiet fury. Nova Sky reached back out. This time, they weren't sending tweets or generic emails. They came with offers, A full refund for Alyssa and Jalen, lifetime first-class passes, a sizable donation to anti-discrimination organizations. It sounded good on paper, maybe enough to calm the public, maybe enough to stop Richard's moves. But when the CEO's assistant read the proposal over the phone, Richard's reply was swift and sharp. Freebies don't erase public shame. Your staff treated my children like trespassers. They deserve more than perks. They deserve the truth. Backed into a corner, Nova Sky caved. They had no choice. Richard demanded 3 things: public, transparent, and irreversible. 1. A formal apology, not buried in a tweet, but issued on national media platforms, naming the Carter twins and acknowledging the racial discrimination they endured. 2. Internal reform, including partnerships with inclusion-focused organizations and real diversity training for all airport and in-flight staff. 3. Restoration of dignity, which meant not just compensating the twins but clearing their names and doing so publicly. Nova Sky agreed. By the next morning, Nova Sky released a full public statement. This time, they didn't sugarcoat anything. They admitted failure. They acknowledged that what happened to Alyssa and Jalen was wrong. They named the agents involved. They promised retraining. They pledged real reform. It wasn't just a press release. It was read live by their CEO, voice shaky, hands folded. We failed to treat 2 of our passengers, Alyssa and Jalen Carter, with the respect and dignity every traveler deserves. We are deeply sorry. News of the apology swept through the internet, and this time, people responded with hope. Finally, accountability. This is what change looks like. Respect to Richard Carter for making them listen. Alyssa and Jalen sat quietly in a lounge near their new boarding gate, watching the world unfold from their phones. The storm was easing, but inside emotions still swirled. They were grateful. They were proud, but they were also tired. I still can't believe this all started because we just wanted to take a trip, Alyssa said softly. Jalen gave a half smile. We didn't just take a trip, we took a stand. When they finally boarded their rescheduled flight that evening, the experience was different. Staff greeted them with warm smiles. A flight attendant offered them drinks the moment. They sat down. Another handed them handwritten notes of apology from Nova Sky's management. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase what happened. But it was a start. As the plane pulled onto the runway, Jalen looked out the window. The city lights blinked below like tiny stars. He leaned back and whispered to Alyssa, "We changed something." She nodded, eyes shining. "Yeah. And maybe that'll make the next traveler's journey just a little smoother." The airline also awarded the twins lifetime VIP status, access to private lounges, and a custom plaque honoring their courage. The world watched, stunned. Some praised Nova Sky's reversal. Others criticized the company for acting only under pressure. But one thing was clear. Change had been forced into motion. Richard called his children that evening. "They've agreed to everything," he told them. "You stood firm, and now they're doing the right thing because of you." Alyssa and Jalen sat quietly, overwhelmed. They hadn't asked to lead a movement. They hadn't asked to become symbols. But now, their pain had lit a fire that pushed a giant to its knees. The chaos began to fade. Falcon Air resumed normal operations. Airports calmed. Passengers stopped refreshing delay boards every 10 minutes. But something had shifted in the air. Alyssa scrolled through messages on her phone, people thanking them, strangers sharing their own experiences, stories of change already starting elsewhere. Jalen leaned back and exhaled. "I'm glad it's over," he said softly. Alyssa nodded. "Me too. But I'm even more glad we didn't let it go." Despite the victory they had won, Alyssa and Jalen couldn't erase the sting in their hearts. Even after everything had been made right publicly, they still carried the weight of knowing they were judged, not by their achievements, not by their conduct, but by how they looked. They leaned on each other. And when things got overwhelming, they leaned on their father's wisdom. His strength had been the lighthouse through a storm that threatened to break them. Still, the deeper truth remained. No matter how smart, successful, or well-spoken they were, there would always be people who saw their skin before their souls, but they refused to be bitter. Instead, they chose to focus on the change they had sparked. Thanks to their courage and Richard Carter's unwavering stance, the world was now having conversations it had ignored for far too long. People were challenging systems. Corporations were being held accountable. The silence was finally cracking. And that, Alyssa thought, meant something. That evening, the twins sat quietly at Terminal 5 in New York's JFK Airport, waiting to board their rescheduled flight to Paris. They watched as travelers passed by, some smiling at them, some nodding in silent respect. A few even approached with soft words of encouragement, or simply said, "Thank you," and kept walking. Some asked for photos. Others shared their own stories of injustice, small or big. For the first time since the nightmare began, they allowed themselves to hope. But they were no fools. They knew real change wasn't measured in one polite note or one smooth flight. The true test would come after the cameras were gone and the headlines faded. Would Nova Sky follow through on its promises? Or were the reforms just a shiny surface covering the same old cracks? Only time would tell. Still, the weight in their chests felt lighter. As the plane lifted off the runway and soared into the night sky, the city lights below sparkled like distant stars. Alyssa leaned back in her seat, finally relaxing. Beside her, Jalen closed his eyes, his expression calm for the first time in days. This trip to Paris wasn't just a vacation anymore, it was proof. Proof that standing up for what's right could lead to something bigger. Over the next few days, global media picked up the aftermath. Nova Sky's apology had made headlines, but so had the ripple effect. Think pieces popped up in newspapers and online journals about racism in the travel industry. Experts discussed how systemic bias affected not just travelers, but airline staff, hiring practices, and customer service standards. Activists used the Carter twins' story as a call to action for real corporate accountability. Even rival airlines started publishing diversity commitments, vowing to train staff and audit their treatment of passengers. It became clear this wasn't just a news story, it was the beginning of a movement. People talked about how subtle bias had always been a part of air travel, who got randomly selected, who was believed without question, who was treated with suspicion for simply wearing a hoodie in first class. Thanks to Alyssa and Jalen, people were finally listening. They hadn't just won back their dignity, they'd helped thousands of others feel seen. No matter where they went, people recognized them. Strangers approached in cafes, airports, and bookstores, eager to shake their hands or share their own painful stories. One woman spoke softly about being pulled aside every time she flew, questioned over and over despite having valid documents. A man confessed he'd stopped traveling altogether after being followed around too many terminals. The twins listened. They nodded. And with each new story, their understanding of the issue deepened. This wasn't just about one incident at a check-in counter. This was bigger, deeper, woven into the fabric of systems meant to be fair, but often weren't. That's when Alyssa turned to her brother one evening and said, "We have to do more than just move on." And so, they did. Back home, the twins launched a bold new initiative called Open Skies Project, a campaign focused on promoting inclusion and equity in the travel industry. Their goal? To make sure no traveler, no matter their background or appearance, would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong. They hosted workshops, sat on panel discussions, partnered with nonprofits and civil rights organizations. Their father, Richard Carter, joined them often, sharing his story of rising through the ranks despite facing similar obstacles in his own journey. His voice carried weight, and when he spoke of change, people listened. "You turned something ugly into something powerful," Richard once told them at a speaking engagement. "That takes more than strength, it takes heart." Months passed. Headlines faded, but the impact didn't. Alyssa and Jalen still remembered every second of that day at the Nova Sky counter, the humiliation, the disbelief, the helplessness. But those moments no longer defined them. Instead, they fueled their purpose. Their courage inspired others to stand up, to speak out, and to stop letting things slide. And one warm evening, as they arrived at same airport for yet another trip, this time flying with Skylink, they felt the difference. The check-in process was smooth. The staff greeted them with genuine smiles. No side eyes, no suspicion, just professionalism. As they strolled through the terminal, people turned. Not out of judgment, but recognition. A boy nudged his mother and pointed. "That's them," he whispered. A teenage girl approached, holding a magazine with their faces on the cover. Her eyes were wide with admiration. "Are you really the Carter twins?" she asked shyly. Jalen crouched to her level, offering a warm smile. "Yes, we are. And guess what? You can be anything you want. Just believe in yourself." The girl's mother stepped forward, emotion brimming in her voice. "Thank you," she said. "You've given my daughter someone to look up to." Alyssa reached for Jalen's arm as they walked toward their gate, the weight of the moment settling over her. This journey had tested them, shaped them, but it had also brought them closer together and closer to their calling. They weren't just siblings anymore. They were advocates, role models, agents of change. Once seated on the plane, Jalen leaned over and whispered, "Remember when we thought this whole trip was ruined?" Alyssa laughed quietly, her eyes fixed on the skyline through the window, where the setting sun dipped behind clouds painted in pink and gold. "Oh, I remember," she said. "But look at us now. We didn't just survive that day. We turned it into something so much bigger." Jalen nodded thoughtfully. "And maybe, just maybe, we made the skies a little better for everyone else." As the plane lifted off and climbed into the night, the lights of New York glimmered below. Tiny stars scattered across the darkness. In that moment, Alyssa and Jalen felt something powerful. Not just peace, not just relief, purpose. Their fight wasn't over, and it wouldn't be easy, but they had learned something unshakable. When you use your voice, when you refuse to be silent in the face of wrong, you can move mountains. They had sparked a movement, started conversations that mattered, inspired everyday people to believe they, too, could make a difference. More than anything, they'd proven that hope travels. 2. It rides alongside pain, it climbs with perseverance, and it soars with love. And so, as the cabin lights dimmed and the plane sailed higher into the starlit sky, Alyssa and Jalen sat side by side, ready for whatever came next. Together. And unstoppable. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you never miss stories that spark change and inspire hope.